as well. And by the way, you know, if we want to drive down the numbers of people who need to seek abortion, we should be making healthcare free and guaranteed. And we should be making it extremely easy to access, particularly birth control and reproductive care. So, I mean, this is ridiculous. Anyways, I figured that I just wanted to hop on and talk with you all. There's been so much going on between what's happening in the state of Texas, what's happening, you know, with the pullout in Afghanistan, with a whole bunch of other things going on. And so I just kind of want to just, you know, hop on and talk to you all about it. And I'm just really thrilled. Look at that. You all we've been on this live for just a few minutes, and you all have already fundraised over $12,000 to support grassroots organizers and abortion care in the state of Texas. They are not going to scare us, okay? And the reason this is happening in Texas, I think, is very calculated, because Texas is a huge state, as we know, and it has been turning blue. It has been purple. Elections there are competitive, and they're only getting more competitive as time goes on. And so they are this kind of attack and targeting of the state of Texas is extremely intentional, because they are now at the precipice, and they are, you know, Texas state legislators are now at the point where they have nowhere to hide. They have gerrymandered insane districts in the state of Texas to retain and to hold on to the number of Republican seats that they have there. And now they have nowhere to go. And so their next result is instead of actually changing their views, because they're so beholden to an underlying logic of white supremacy and patriarchy and corruption and greed and corporate power and lobbying, because they are so tied to that in a normal democracy, people would usually respond to declining popularity with an adjustment of their views. And they're not adjusting their views. They are now resorting to voter suppression. They are resorting to the control of people's bodies, of women and gender nonconforming people's bodies. And like, for what? Honestly, for what? Because we know that making abortion illegal doesn't stop abortions. It just makes abortion, it just kills people. What happens is that people then try to seek back alley abortions or abortions in other ways. And by the way, it essentially remains functionally legal if you are wealthy, white, and privileged. When abortion is illegal, wealthy and privileged people are still able to get abortions. Kind of like decriminalizing drugs and cannabis. The way that when drugs and cannabis are illegal, they're mainly illegal for low-income people, black people, and brown people. But for white, privileged people, like even here in New York City, people can walk around Wall Street with Coke in their pocket, and you never see those folks getting stopped and frisked. And so when we make certain essential services like abortion illegal, know that it's functionally legal for wealthy white women, for example. And making it illegal only criminalizes and harms the most vulnerable people in our society. So what we've got here is we're fundraising for the clinic. I just want to thank you. This is like insane. We're already at 17 grand. I tweeted out earlier, if you're interested in looking at some of these grassroots organizations a little bit more, I tweeted out earlier the link to it, and there's 8 different grassroots organizations that are a wide variety of and a wide diversity of gender, of service care, of organizing, of we make sure that we have immigrant, black serving, immigrant serving communities there, that we have metro and rural clinics and organizing there. So it's there. So take a look at the link if you want to actually dig into some of these organizations. But I mean, there's the other issue too, where we need to keep it real, where right now we actually have the ability, thanks to you all, and we have the ability to stop all of this right now, because we have a Democratic majority Senate, we have a Democratic House, and we have a Democratic White House. And so this isn't just about blaming Republicans. Democrats need to step it up, and they're not fighting this. I'll be the first to tell you that my party isn't fighting hard enough, and we need to fight harder for this. I am appalled when I'm in these conversations in the House and the reluctance that people have towards reforming gerrymandering and actually standing up to dark money in politics, because people have been reliant on these things for so long. And I just feel like there comes a point where, you know what, if it means there are some things that are so important that it's worth our seat. We should not be, addicted to holding seats in Congress forever and ever and ever and ever. Some people have very long tenures in Congress, and I do not, I don't speak poorly of that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If their community, their communities are choosing them, their communities want them to represent them, they're doing good work, and frankly, there is something to be said for, that institutional knowledge, and it does take time. But the fact of the matter is that there are some things that are worth our seats, and if we can reform gerrymandering, if we can get dark money out of politics, that's worth it. It's worth it. And the thing is that it's not just the cost of doing it personally, or the cost of not doing it is our democracy. The cost of not ending the filibuster right now is our democracy. And people don't have to worry about the fact that they didn't gerrymander or do anything like that in the future, because our democracy will be flushed down the toilet if we do not protect the right to vote. That is just what it is. That is the precipice that we're at right now. And we have senators, Democratic senators, that don't seem to understand that caring for people and protecting their right to vote, even if it doesn't personally benefit them, is still important to our country. And it's just unbelievable. And in some cases, they're just outright voting against their own interests. So, I think the White House, frankly, I think the Biden administration needs to step up. I think that they're leaving leverage on the table with some of these senators. I think that these senators themselves, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, etc., and it's not just them two. There are more senators, particularly when it comes to the issue of the filibuster, that I believe are kind of hiding behind them. And we can't allow for this to happen. Okay? I'm not going to sit here and say this is all Republicans' fault when, they're out here attacking us, but we're not putting up our shields. We're just allowing this to happen. And we cannot allow this to happen anymore. It's ridiculous. Anyways, so we need to make sure that we abolish the filibuster. So, and here's the thing, is that we can pass H.R. 1. We can pass the For the People Act, which allows which allows for universal mail-in voting, voting rights protections. You have the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which helps restore the very parts of the Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court gutted. But we need to do it. And if we don't do it, absolutely everything is at stake. But anyways, there's that issue. The other thing that I kind of want to talk about is Afghanistan and everything that we've been seeing in the withdrawal of Afghanistan. And, here's what I'll say is that if you turn on TV over the last couple weeks, there is just pundit after pundit after pundit after pundit just absolutely attacking and going after the Biden administration. And the thing is that if you actually break down all of these guests and all of these people that maybe you've never seen before or that you don't recognize, that introduce themselves as military intelligence or other sorts of experts on this issue, that are saying that in their quote unquote professional opinion, XYZ, slamming all of this. Here's the thing that I have to say about that is that this is exactly why no other president wanted to leave Afghanistan, because they knew that this was going to happen. But here's the thing that I think is important to say is that we know from reporting in places like the Washington Post, New York Times, etc., that that generals lied, previous White House administrations were dishonest about this. Like, there was a massive cover-up in how bad things were in Afghanistan, and that it was bipartisan, right? There's documentation from Republican administrations, from even the Obama administration, where they were trying to hide and essentially obscure data that showed exactly how bad things actually were, and try to promote the collection and the release of information that really obscured the truth of what was happening on the ground. And the thing is that and you have just like issues of that people talk about that again, and this has been widely reported, and you just have these same people that are on TV right now, and the same circles of people who are on TV right now trying to convince everybody that the withdrawal was bad and it was the worst thing and all this other stuff. A lot of this is from the same military industrial complex that was lying to the American public for 20 years about how things were going in Afghanistan. These are the same interests that were telling us that the U.S. had established and helped strengthen the Afghan government to an excellent degree, and we're just wrapping things up, and and everything is fine. And what happens is that I'm sure administration after administration comes in with the belief that we're ready to withdraw, and then they find out that actually what the progress that had been happening on the ground is much different than what was being promoted and stated publicly. And so what that means to me is that once you're in that position, every single administration, when they wanted to pull out, would have been in a position where withdrawal was going to be difficult. And by the way, I don't know what the measure or expectation is of what a quote unquote successful withdrawal is, but I hope people understand that this is what war looks like. It is not neat and it is not pretty. It is violent. It is brutal. And we're out here expecting like this is supposed to be a cakewalk. I mean, this is war. And I think what has been shocking to so many people recently is that we've just allowed this war to happen in the background with background noise. and the news didn't really talk about it every day. The scenes of the violence weren't happening every day. The drone strikes that were killing innocent families and children weren't being aired on television every day. And so what we saw over the last month were some of the first images of the true cost of war. And it is shocking and it is radicalizing. And there are many areas where I'm a vehement critic of the Biden administration. Many. But this is not one of them, in that his decision to withdraw was the right one. And these images and this shameful, the shame of what we're seeing right now, this is the shame of 20 years of occupation and imperialist foreign policy. And that's what we should be ashamed about. I mean, we should be ashamed that this is what we have been involved in for 20 years. I was a child when the United States decided to invade Afghanistan. I was a child. And I'm a member of Congress now. And this war has existed for my entire life, for my entire youth life, for my entire adulthood, all of it. And if you're my age or around my age or younger, we have only known war. We have only known life in war. And here's a preview of what's about to come. All these folks that are just chomping at the bit to make sure that the United States remain in conflict and that we fund this just insatiable military complex. We are about to pull out of one of the longest and most expensive wars in American history, and they still want to keep our military budget not just the same, but they're trying to make it even higher. Can someone explain to me that? We end a war and our military budget goes up. There's an addiction to the spoils of war that benefit a very few, and they have an enormous amount of influence in Washington. And that's why we need everyday people to really come together and really resist this. And so I just want to thank you all for seeing through it, because I do see a lot of people seeing through it. And again, there are many areas where I disagree with the Biden administration. I was infuriated at their decision to strike Syria without congressional authorization earlier this year. I disagree with the role that the United States government has played in, for example, in not enforcing leahy laws, with what we saw in Colombia, with providing U.S. military assistance or military transactions to countries that we know commit human rights abuses. I very much disagree with a lot of Biden's foreign policy, but the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was the right one. And every single president contributed to this. Every single one. Bush, of course, started all of this. Obama continued it. Trump continued it. And then he struck a deal with the Taliban to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners. But Biden was the only one that had the ganas to withdraw, knowing that when you stand up to a complex like this, that they have the capacity to influence media narratives on a mass scale that most people do not have, and most people or interest groups or industries do not have the ability to do. Could you imagine if tenants or if unions, labor unions, had the kind of wall-to-wall punditry that is available to people who, to a complex of people who want to keep us at war? Could you imagine if the kind of just pummeling that you saw on TV, like, do you ever see that in favor of things like universal health care? No. Do you ever see that in favor of things like mom and pop home ownership and tenants and renters and an advocacy for affordable housing? No, you don't see that. Do you ever see that kind of wall to wall, just like pummeling on issues of the border in a way that's not even politicized, but for humanitarian reasons? No. You ever see that kind of pummeling for people's voter rights, civil rights, anti-racism, for a living wage? No, you don't see any of that. And it's for a reason. And so, you know, I understand folks that say, you know, I understand folks that say this could have been better. Could it have been? I mean, perhaps, you know, could we have not been locked in by a deal from the previous administration that set hard limitations to what we were able to do in Afghanistan with the Taliban? Yeah. I mean, we could have not ever gone to Afghanistan to begin with in terms of invading the entire country, but we are living with the situation, the conditions that we have right now. And so, you know, it's just, it's ridiculous. So there's that, you know, and I also kind of want to, and someone said, like, stop blaming this on Trump. I'm blaming this on every single US president for the last 20 years. How about that? Yeah, I am blaming Trump, and this is on Obama, and this is on Bush. How about that? Anyways, so all of this is to say that that, you know, the other area that I kind of want to touch on is the eviction moratorium, because this is something that's like not being discussed enough. That and the upcoming potential expiration of unemployment assistance. And so this is something that I think is super important, these two issues. We're talking about, I mean, people think that folks not paying rent, I mean, it's really wild to see this kind of welfare queen esque narrative that's being advanced on this, because it couldn't be further from the truth. We have 11 million people at least who are at risk of eviction in the United States. 11 million. For context, that's larger than the entire population of New York City in this country. And so we're talking about a population larger than the entire city, than the largest city in the United States of America, all potentially being at risk of being evicted overnight. That is not an anecdote. That is not a character fault. That's a systemic failure. That's a systemic failure. And so I feel like we have that issue, right? Then you also have the issue of actual small mom and pop landlords that maybe have like one property or etc., who are also being left holding the bag, because what we should have done at the beginning of the pandemic, which is something that I advocated for, the Progressive Caucus advocated for, is to let the banks hold the bag for the pandemic, and we can deal with it there. And so what that means is that is a suspension of mortgage payments, which would allow, so essentially, let's say you have a 20-year mortgage, right? If we suspended mortgage payments for a year, basically you pause those mortgage payments for those small mom and pops, not these big landlords that are actually take up a much larger proportion of evictions, by the way, in many cities. But basically you pause those mortgage payments, and then you add it to the end of your mortgage cycle. So for example, let's say your mortgage ended next year, or if your mortgage is supposed to end 5 years from now, you just tack on an extra year and you add that pause of mortgage payments. There are so many different ways to go about it. People may say, oh, that's not the way you do it, go through it this way. Either way, it should not be on middle class people and working class people to be holding the bag. So there's that. And so what you do is that you allow for an eviction moratorium, and you also push for a similar moratorium on mortgages. There are many different ways to go about it too. It's like, it doesn't have to be this one way, but if you time both of those things at the same time, that helps ease a lot of the pressure on the system. But there was a separate, smaller mortgage moratorium that was put in. But the thing is like, regardless, that was not done a year ago. The answer is not evicting 11 million people in the United States. I mean, that's just not. I mean, that is like a humanitarian crisis, especially in fall on the precipice of winter. It is a catastrophic event, and you know, it's like we cannot allow 11 million people at once to be evicted. The degree of that, and then the thing is that if you evict it, we've allocated, so right now the entire country owes about $21 billion in back rent, right? Congress allocated $46 billion, almost more than twice that, to pay all the back rent, okay? So all we need, and the thing is like, these state governments and municipalities have not gotten those funds out. They haven't gotten these funds out in the way that they need to get them out. But the answer is not evicting people when their rent is essentially paid for. And then what happens is that if those evictions happen, a lot of people do not know that they forego their right to collect that back rent from the ERAP funds. So then you're just out. And so we really need to make sure that we make everybody whole. And I'm not sitting here saying, oh, you know, this is on, like, I'm not even going to have the discussion about assigning blame or making, because, you know, it's just a very toxic housing system that we have in the United States writ large. And, you know, so full disclosure, I'm a renter. I am not a homeowner. I am a millennial with 5 figures of student loan debt that honestly, like everybody else, has thought that I may never be able to afford a home in my life. Because my family's from New York City. This city has transformed in a way that makes it almost impossible for working people to own the actual home that they live in. And so I'm a renter. Anyways, all of that is to say is that like there's a really unhealthy housing system that we have here in the United States, and you could go into this traditional, you know, working people fighting middle class people, or working class or low income people fighting middle class people. And then it's just, you know, small landlords fighting tenants and having a very antagonistic relationship, while the big banks just get away with all of this. And one of the big issues that we have, you know, I thought it was really interesting. I was actually reading some online chatter about from some folks and some landlords, and I saw a comment that I found was really interesting. This one said, I bought into the idea that real estate was my retirement plan. And I thought that was very fascinating, because generations before us, baby boomers and older generations before us, they experienced and presided over the gutting of Social Security and pensions and actually sound retirement plans and options, and oversaw this transition to a dependence on a 401k type system where the economy busts every 10 years. And, if you retire when it's high, good for you. If you retire when it busts, your entire life is at risk. And the idea that was kind of advanced after that was not, let's restore and expand Social Security, let's fight for pensions, etc. But the idea that was proffered off was, okay, if you get to 45 or 50 or closer to retirement age and you realize that you have nowhere near the amount of money necessary to retire, you can invest in a property and someone else's rent can pay for your retirement. And I can see why during that time people may have bought into that idea. But the fact of the matter is that real estate is an inherently risky investment. And over generations, we allowed the gutting of actual retirement options, actual ways for us as a society to care for our elders and to care for our seniors to be totally gutted. And instead of fighting to restore public options to live up to our values and care for our elders, we proffered off like a real estate, this real estate pyramid scheme. And it's like, this is partially why so much of this conversation is so charged, because we went from having strong, robust public systems to help ensure that our elders are cared for, to relying on real estate investment properties as people's retirement plans. And that is like a very, that is a really big problem, an issue that we have. And again, it's like no shade on people who have a rental property or anything like that. Like, that's not the kind of conversation I'm trying to have. I'm trying to say systemically, when you look at what's happening macro, like this idea that people conceptualize an investment property as a retirement plan, those are two very different things. And when you hinge your future and your well-being on a high-risk investment, this, and then when millions of people do that, that is a macroeconomic issue. It's a systemic risk. And then we keep bailing out. We once again, people want to say, oh, socialism is bad. Actually, private industry advocates for socialized losses all the time. That's what bailouts are. That's what all of these things are. And so, I think that this is this is really touching on like major issues. And so we have, these urgent and short-term issues that we have right now, and we do need to make sure that we're caring for people's needs. Side note, if you are in the state of New York, every state has different laws. I cannot speak to every single state, but if you're in the state of New York, right now, 800,000 New Yorkers are eligible for emergency rental assistance, for the emergency rental assistance program. Before they even cut anybody a check, just applying alone gives you certain eviction protections, okay? Only as of about last week, I believe, or a couple days ago, from our data, only 160,000 New Yorkers have applied out of the 800,000 eligible. So please make sure that that you're taking a look at that. Please make sure that you're applying if you feel like you are in danger of eviction. please, please, please apply. And make sure that, make sure that you're accessing it. It's easily available online. You can take a look at my office, at the New York State office. Just Google New York Emergency Rental Assistance Program and make sure that you apply. And people are saying, sorry, I'm just taking a look at some of the questions that you all have. I'm going to pull up some of the questions now. Oh, they like redid this format. But yeah, so I'm just looking at some of the questions you all have, see what we can do. Let's see. Someone said, can you talk about Hurricane Ida? Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's another major issue that we should talk about too. Thank you so much for bringing it up. And then one last note too, again, is that this is not, again, I want to make sure that I'm super clear that this is not about bashing folks who, did get roped into that, because the entirety of our government response, once again, is leaving homeowners holding the bag, and small mom and pop homeowners holding the bag. And that is like, this is what we saw in 2008. This is very similar to what we saw in 2008, where people's homes get taken away, where everything lands on them, and banks, they have not been asked to pitch in on this with our laws and with our policy. And we have to stop, balancing the backs on this, of all this on working people and on the middle class. And it's like, this is what it is. And it's like, people, whatever, folks may say I'm so wrong and all of this. Okay, well, if you think that the banks have been doing their part, and if you think that government has been too hard on banks easing the pressure on homeowners and on renters, I mean, good luck, I guess, but I'm just going to disagree with you on that one. I think that's wrong. But anyways, I'm going to take up a look at some of the questions. One of you guys said, one of you all said that, let's talk about Hurricane Ida. And I think here's another issue. And again, I know there's a lot of y'all might have been overwhelmed by just everything that's been happening. It's just been feeling like these, just things have been just crashing all during this month. Sorry, I'm just taking a look here at some of the things you guys are putting. And especially what's happening with Hurricane Ida is that, this is climate change. I don't know what more people need to see. And I'm very sad to say they're going to see a lot more in our lifetime to understand that this is human caused. We are at the brink. The UN IPCC report was released this year saying we are at code red for humanity. And we simply cannot afford to continue burning fossil fuels. We can't. We cannot continue. I was just thinking about it. We had all of these emergency alerts that were coming out just today, and I don't feel like I have ever experienced a year with this many emergency weather-related alerts. This whole thing started because we're supposed to be sheltering in place in New York City due to a tornado warning, a flash flood warning after a flash flood watch earlier today. This is beyond our new normal. And unfortunately, this year is going to be likely the coolest year of the rest of our lives. It only gets hotter and it only gets more extreme from here. And the question is, if we're going to do something to stop it, or if we're going to continue to allow the fossil fuel industry to exert major influence over both political parties. And that's really the situation that we're having. And and it's going to be the most vulnerable. It's going to be as we saw evacuation from places in the path of a hurricane, in the path of a wildfire, in the path of any sort of major natural disaster, is, if we do not make this and invest public resources and collective resources in making this something that's available to all people, then what happens is that the most vulnerable people get swept away. And we saw this after Hurricane Katrina. We saw this after Hurricane Katrina. And then when all those homes are washed away, there is, that's when you see like these high-rise condos that come up, and the very communities that suffer the most then also start experiencing displacement from the very the communities that they know their entire lives. And so I like it kind of boggles my mind sometimes. It really does, that my views, my stances, and what I believe is deemed by both political parties as like far left extremism, like whatever. You know, I've had leaders, I mean, of course, Republicans are just off the deep end. They probably think I have like 5G Wi-Fi chips in my bloodstream or whatever. But even the Democratic Party also thinks that I'm like some far left extremist. And it legitimately blows my mind, because I'll be honest, like in my political development, and I mean, maybe some people on the left will come for me on what I'm about to say, but I legitimately did not grow up in a super political household. Like I didn't. I mean, if anything, I was raised with a lot more socially conservative, like environments and things around me. But I never thought that my beliefs were like far left until I really started growing into adulthood, and I realized that I live in a country that considers guaranteed healthcare communism. I live in a country that, and you know, right now the United States considers an actual living wage to be far left, extremist, violent, whatever. The idea of just acknowledging the plain science of the matter, that the fossil fuel industry and the future of humanity are fundamentally incompatible. They just are. I mean, that's not a political opinion. That is the science. We continue to burn fossil fuels, our planet will become inhabitable. And if you actually look at the science, like the trajectory that we've been on is 4 degrees, 4 degrees of warming by 2100. That renders half of the, that renders half of the landmass on Earth functionally inhabitable to human life. That's what happens if we do nothing. That's what happens if we don't draw down, if we don't transition to renewables, if we don't do these things. That is like worst case. And then best case is that we get, frankly, our shit together and actually start transitioning to renewable energies. But there is no sustainable future where fossil fuels continue to be burned. Again, not a political opinion, that's just science. But apparently that's far left, extremist, radical, whatever. And you're like a terrorist for believing that people should not be murdered by the state. But you're fine if you defend the folks who, if you defend the folks who raided the Capitol on January 6th. Or you're fine, or you're a patriot or whatever, if you subjugate women's bodies and you allow, like the state of Texas does, to punish a person with a uterus who's seeking reproductive care more than you punish the person who raped them. Because I don't see any kinds of statutes right now that hold rapists right now in a universal level to the same sort of blanket provisions that we have I mean, the state of Texas just allowed any person to sue any other person, even if they have nothing to do with the situation, for even assisting a person in seeking reproductive health care and abortion. So that right there is like the status, that is the power status quo of government right now. We're one of the largest states in the United States of America, has laws that certainly seem and appear to be more favorable to rapists than the victims who want to get reproductive health care as a result of their attack. So, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that a status quo like that considers me some far left radical whatever. No offense to people who are actually there, because I don't even think that's necessarily a bad thing, because, I mean, you look at what is deemed far left radical views in the United States, and it's like, the state shouldn't be allowed to murder people with impunity, and far right radical views are, we should murder members of Congress. Yet, both of these things are viewed somehow the same, right? Anyways, and like people say I'm talking BS. You know what's BS? Members of Congress calling January 6th a tourist trip. That's BS. Okay? That's BS. I feel pretty good about the fact that that wasn't a goddamn tourist visit. Okay? 7 people died. More, actually. And more continue to die. I mean, more continue to die. And someone had mentioned earlier that this is Suicide Prevention Month. And so, I mean, more continue to die to suicide in the aftermath of the 6th. And you have, like, Republican members of Congress, for all their pro-police rhetoric, voted against even giving congressional medals of honor to the Capitol police officers that put their lives on the line to save people who were there. I mean, and then we know that this is not about, and who, by the way, are currently threatening the life of a Capitol police officer who had recently come out this past week about what had happened. And so, like, I mean, this is really this, like, far-right conservatism. Let's just call it what it is. It's just blatant self-interest. It has nothing to do with protecting anybody. It's not even pro-police, like, to be honest, because it's just pro-police when it's convenient for them, when they feel like it. It's like pro-policing if they want to defend the right to murder people in black communities with impunity, but it's not pro-police when it comes to January 6th. It's not pro-police or pro-rule of law when a Republican president is breaking every law in the book. It's not pro that at all. And so, like, honestly, it's just about self-interest. And so right now, this political moment is actually not about left versus right. It's about a me mentality versus an us mentality. That's really what this is. I mean, it's really about, like, do you believe that you as an individual are the most important thing in the universe? Or do you believe that our collective humanity is important? Our collective humanity and our collective ecology and our planet as a whole is what is important in our existence. And that's really what I think this political moment is about. And when you see the kind of laws, whether it's voter suppression, whether it's anti-abortion laws, whether it's like burn fossil fuels until civilization collapses, it's like all about like this short-term selfish high. I mean, for a very narrow class of people who not only benefit from it, but want to preserve their ability to benefit from it. Because it's not just like all white people, it's not all men, it's not all this, it's not all that. Like, this is white supremacy. This is patriarchy. And some people decide to recognize what privilege they have in this world and try to join and use what they have in struggle, in as we imperfectly, venture to a better world and protect each other. And other people say, well, I got mine and I don't want the world to change, even if it means burning this planet to a crisp. And so, like, the thing that's crazy too is that even if you get everything that you want, like, even if that side gets everything they want, they burn fossil fuels to their heart's content, they suppress the right to vote, they try to subjugate women and gender nonconforming people, like, they try to do all that. Even if they get everything on their wish list, that is not a happy life. Because deep down, whether it's a conscious acknowledgement or a subconscious acknowledgement, the truth of the matter is that that trickles down to an individual life. It's unhappy. And I think that's frankly why a lot of people are unhappy in the way we've currently created our political system. So we right now know that climate change is, we're in trouble. We're seeing it right now. Our infrastructure is at risk. We cannot afford this. People's lives are at risk. And so anyways, that being said, it does seem like the flash flood warning is starting to lift a little bit, and we're going to go back and check in on folks. So please, folks, stay safe. Do not go out. If you're in New York, if you're in New York City, check in on people, see what they need. This is the work. This is the work ahead of us, okay? So thank you all so much. You all have raised $28,000 for clinic access in Texas. And that's on top of earlier today, just a few hours ago. We had raised $32,000 for that 8 grassroots organization spread. So I can't thank you all enough, because people in Texas really need us right now. And we're not going to take this sitting down. We're gonna fight back. So thank you all so much. Bye-bye.